Narcos and the federal sentencing guidelines. Today we're going to talk about El Chapo's wife and how the federal sentencing guidelines work, especially when we're talking about drug charges. Welcome back to Hashtag Lord, you guys. Good to be back in the studio again.
I know.
And, we talked about before on the show trying to incorporate some different Netflix documentaries, things like that.
Yes.
Did you ever watch Narcos on Netflix?
The Mexican edition?
Well, any of them. Do you watch any of them?
Yeah, I watched the Mexican edition.
Okay. You didn't watch the Colombian versions or the first couple seasons?
No, I watched the Mexican edition. I was actually in Mexico when I watched
it. Oh, geez.
That was probably a bad move.
Immerse yourself in the culture,
I was. Well, we were with my family and it was...
Yeah.
I did think it was kind of funny when we were driving into the hotel property and there was like a gate and then there was another gate and then there was another gate with like a lot of guard towers. This is kind of overkill. It seems like a really nice area. I don't know. And then I watched Narcos and I was like, oh.
Get it. Yeah.
Ding,
well,
ding, ding.
For this topic, you watched the right season.
I did. I watched the right season.
And I will say, just not that they need a plug because it's Netflix, but it definitely, there's parts of all of those series that make being a drug trafficker look extremely sexy. Like a lot of money, power, respect, all that kind of stuff.
I can't remember the character's name, but she's like the right-hand girl.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? And I think at one point she wears this like white jumpsuit situation. And I was like, I need that jumpsuit in my life.
Need to be a drug queen.
I mean, they dress amazing, and I think I would look pretty cool dressed as a drug queen. But I'm not. I'm a lawyer. I can't do that. I'm not going to.
There's also usually a violent ending to most of those people's lives, whether it's prison or death.
I would like to not die that way.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so, for anybody who doesn't know, El Chapo has been one of the more renowned, notorious kingpins of the Mexican cartel. Yeah. His actual full name is Joaquin Guzman Loera, but everybody knows him as El Chapo. Name's been thrown around.
Mean?
El Chapo?
Does it mean the boy or?
I should have looked that up before we started.
Yeah, that's why we need my husband here because he actually speaks Spanish, which is great because when we were in Argentina, he was able to speak Spanish and everyone look at me. Right. I guess because I have darker eyes and skin or something. And they're like, why aren't you speaking Spanish? And then, white boy over here, blonde hair, blue eyes, fair skin, white of
gringo,
white.
Yeah.
The gringo, the epitome of gringo is over here speaking, beautiful conversational Spanish. And I'm like, I know nachos.
Well, and he's been on the show numerous times.
Yeah.
None of our listeners watching on YouTube would be able to see and think, okay, Spencer's fluent,
Yeah. No, and I speak some Turkish and Russian, which is completely useless in this situation.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I'm sure he would know what it means.
Right.
Can we dial him in? No, I'm kidding. He's probably working.
Well, and just a little backstory on El Chapo. So he was convicted in 2019 in the United States, sentenced to life plus 30 years for all of his drug trafficking activities.
Sure.
He's been notorious as one of the leaders of the Sinaloa cartel out of Mexico. And here recently, his wife, Emma Coronel Aispuro, we're going to call her Emma for simplicity's sake.
I'll call her Emma. You can call her El Chapo's wife.
So she's 31. She was arrested at the Dulles International Airport in Washington State on February 22nd and is now being charged with participating in a conspiracy to distribute cocaine, methamphetamine, heroin, and marijuana for importation into the United States.
Dulles is also in D.C., by the way.
Oh, okay. Well, I got that wrong. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So, and she's also being charged with assisting El Chapo from his escape from prison in 2015 and assisting in the attempted escape in 2016 or 20.
Loyal wife.
Yeah.
Loyal wife.
Big time. We pulled the complaint affidavit that's been filed by the U.S. government. It alleges that she knew about a lot of this drug trafficking. We're going to get into how the conspiracy works and all that here in a little bit. That she routinely delivered messages to El Chapo while he was in prison to further the drug trafficking conspiracy, and then also to further his escape from prison and his attempted escape later on. She also helped cartel members to arrange purchase of land and assembly of firearms, armored trucks, all the stuff that you see in the Narcos series and all the things that everybody assumes goes on with the cartel and actually does go on. So it's interesting because it gives us an opportunity to discuss the sentencing guidelines and all of that. But first, just because it's intriguing, this life that Emma led after she married El Chapo and then after he was arrested. She was actually born in San Francisco, beauty pageant queen. And this is the part that threw me off. He was 50 whenever they got married. She was 18.
Wow.
What do you think about that?
I am usually not one to judge because, people can find love in many different ways, but what do you talk about?
That's a very good question.
When you're, 32 years older?
Mm-hmm.
It's like me trying to explain Instagram and TikTok and Reels to my grandpa, who's super cool and savvy. Actually, he uses Facebook more than I do. But, there's only so much you can talk about.
And I think throw into the mix, too, that this is a drug kingpin.
Oh, yeah. I mean, let's bring that. I'm over here focused on the conversation. Yeah. How's that going to go?
Well, no, I'm saying, okay, what kind of conversations is you as an 18-year-old who has just become an adult legally is going to have with this guy who's been the leader of one of the most violent drug pin cartels in the world?
And you're a beauty pageant queen in a state renowned for tolerance and having multiple points of view and being really progressive. And then you're over here let me just marry someone who literally kills people who gets in the way of him distributing meth.
And the interesting part,
whatever, probably not meth, other stuff.
All the stuff that she's been charged with.
Yeah.
And the other part, there's also a lot of rumors and thoughts that the whole reason that she got introduced to El Chapo is because her father was trying to gain a position within the cartel to become one of his soldiers. And he actually ended up doing that. He ended up being a part of one of the trafficking routes. He ended up getting convicted and sentenced to over 10 years in prison in the United States for his role in that. That seems like there was a little bit of an arrangement there to, okay, here's my daughter. Let me get in on this money-making ability here.
I'm not sure how I feel. I don't like that.
Hey, well, it's, again, it's a rumor. I mean, the part about him getting arrested and being a part of the cartel
is not a rumor. That's true.
It's the meet cute part that's somewhat of the rumor.
Yeah. I can't get it. Spencer and I are 6 months apart, so I can't get over this whole 32-year age difference.
100%.
Yeah.
Now, again, it's ironic that I'm the one breaking the pop culture side of this whole thing.
I know, really.
Aren't you proud of me?
I am so proud of you, friend. Good job.
She kept a low profile until people really didn't know a whole lot about her until the 2019 trial of her husband. And then things became a little bit more public. Mm-hmm. She has 587,000 followers on Instagram.
I was about to say, wait, where's my phone? I need to look at her outfits because they're probably beautiful.
She's only got 5 posts.
What?
5 posts, over 500,000 followers on Instagram.
Well, I'm going to go follow her.
Go take a look at it. Go take a look at it. Now, the other thing is she ended up on a 2019 VH1 reality show. She wasn't a main character, but she had a little cameo appearance. The show was called Cartel Crew. Oh. And it had a lot of controversy that came behind it for obvious reasons. And
I'm going to say yes, I would expect such controversy.
Right. And so a lot of people, really criticized VH1 because they were literally having wives of former, not even necessarily cartel. They used Cartel Crew because it's catchy and whatever. But
I mean, you've got the K&K for Keeping Up with the Kardashians, Cartel Crew, CNC.
Sure. And so what they were doing is they were bringing wives of men who were in prison for some type of drug trafficking, whether it was cartel related or something else in the U.S. And there was one episode where she was pitching a clothing line that was inspired by her husband, El Chapo, after he'd been sentenced to life plus 30 years, to these women. And they were all talking about how they could get this off the ground while sitting on a yacht with bodyguards around. I mean, total Narcos looking scene.
Oh my God.
And so VH1 caught a lot of flack for that episode because they're glamorizing this whole cartel, which is wrought with violence and death and all the things that come with it.
Oh my gosh, that's wild to me.
Yeah. And she started getting all this attention. This is literally in a bunch of the news articles I read. All this attention started coming literally because of her designer wardrobes that she was wearing to the trial in 2019.
I was about to ask.
And the way she was pandering to the crowd and just she became a real likable villain. It's kind of the way to put it, if you can imagine what I'm saying there.
Oh, yeah, I get that.
And also during the trial, just some of the testimony that was coming out about all the affairs he was having, all this kind of stuff. She just, without unwavering, just kind of loyal, supportive wife was the role she was playing. So it's interesting now that she's been arrested. It's gonna be interesting to see what her tone is.
Her stories are now. Yeah. Wow.
So. That's the backstory, if you will, of El Chapo's wife. Let's get into some of the legal part of it and talk about the charges and some of the procedure and all that.
You sure you don't want to talk about the designer wardrobe? Because I'm here for that.
So I didn't look up the brands or anything like that. I probably should have. Sorry.
Gosh,
I spent more time.
I
spent more time looking at the charges and the sentencing guidelines.
Yeah, so we can discuss how the federal sentencing guidelines need to be updated.
I'm just a little bit more, up to speed on that than I am probably in what her wardrobe was.
Well, we can talk, Prada and Dior another day.
So she was arrested probably in designer clothes, but when she was arrested, she was being charged, like we said, with conspiracy to traffic cocaine, heroin, marijuana, and methamphetamine. Now, the specific laws that she violated, it's Chapter 21 Chapter 21 of the United States Code, sections 959 through 960, and basically it punishes anyone who commits. It punishes these specific instances of trafficking these types of drugs.
So cocaine, heroin, marijuana, methamphetamines.
Yes. Okay. And so those are all contained within those specific sections. And there's a tie-in statute, which tie-in statute, a lot of times when people are charged with crimes, or we'll just go specifically with crimes, you can be charged with a specific crime, and then there's another law that says, all right, we're going to wrap this in together because you didn't specifically commit this crime, but this says that if you were a part of it, then we're going to charge you with this crime. And I'm talking generally right now. More specifically, it says, okay, we didn't catch you with heroin or meth or cocaine actually on your person.
On your person. Right. Like we didn't catch you with a kilo of like pure coke in your designer handbag. Right. But we know that you were participating in an intent to distribute or participating in a conspiracy to distribute the cocaine.
Right. And so like the way it works is says, okay, you can't distribute cocaine. Got that. Understand that.
Yeah, that's bad. Don't do that. Thomas Ravenel, are you listening? You can't distribute cocaine. Sharing with your friends, not okay. Don't share cocaine.
And so they can't do that, right? So that's part of the 959 thing. But then she didn't have it on her person. So how do they charge her? Well, anyone who commits an offense against the United States or aids, abets, or helps someone who commits that offense, that's how we get to
aiding and abetting.
Right.
We hear that all the time.
We do.
Aiding and abetting. I don't think people really know what that means.
Well, and there's not a black and white definition. It's all fact-based.
Like many things in the law, it all depends on the facts and the context.
It does. And it also, the way we typically see it play out in situations like this is in the idea of a conspiracy. And so this is a term that is broadly thrown around too. And
conspiracy?
Conspiracy.
Yeah.
And it's used in a societal sense when we're talking about conspiracy theories and things like that.
Yes.
But in the legal sense and in the criminal realm, it has a specific legal meaning to it.
Yeah. So when we say conspiracy here, we're not talking about conspiracy the way people talk about the QAnon conspiracy. I know very little about it. I'm trying to keep it that way.
Or even like the fact that we didn't land on the moon conspiracy.
Yeah, that's wild to me. I was like, excuse me?
Yeah.
Of course we landed on the moon.
Right.
I'm sure the Russians would have Soviets, at that time, would have let us know if we didn't.
Right.
Yeah, so, but here, conspiracy, like you're saying, like has a very specific legal definition. And that kind of thing goes back to what we were saying in the previous episodes, that a lot of words that we use here in the law, negligence, conspiracy, intent, foreseeability, they have one meaning in conversational English and a very specific, strict meaning in a legal sense.
Right. And so just for our listeners, a conspiracy generally means that you've got at least two people and they make an agreement to do something that's criminal. And then they actually take an act to further that agreement. At that point, you've got a conspiracy. And we tend to see that a lot of these drug charges in the federal system are charged as conspiracy charges.
Okay, so let's just give an example. So you have Kimmy. Kimmy and Tommy are like, hey, we can make a lot of money selling our extra Adderall because we're not going to use it.
Great example.
And we go to school and it's finals and people want Adderall to study because maybe they just weren't studying earlier in the term. So Tommy and Kimmy are like, all right, Kimmy has a prescription. Tommy is going to be like, all right, I know some frat bros. Sorry.
It's okay. We'll get into the political correctness of that later.
Sure. Some frat bros who will be interested in purchasing it. So Tommy and Kimmy take her Adderall, dump out half the bottle, and put one pill in a little plastic baggie. They put on ski masks, and they contact the frat bros, and they say, meet us at the park at 12:37 a.m. on this day. And then Tommy shows up that Kimmy doesn't, what happens?
Well, I think you can charge both of them.
Okay.
And I think you can charge both of them at the point, and this is, I'm oversimplifying the piece here.
That's fine. We can oversimplify.
Once they put the pill in the bag and Tommy leaves and she sends him out the door, they've made an act in furtherance of this illegal plan that
and let's make it clear,
hatched.
like both Kimmy and Tommy were putting Addies in a bag.
Right. And giving it and selling it, one, which they're not allowed to do.
Correct.
And giving it to someone who does not have their prescription doesn't even mean that they have a prescription, because
it has to be their prescription. Because Adderall is a controlled level 1 substance.
Exactly. And so, what is a controlled substance for our listeners?
A controlled substance is a category of substances that are strictly regulated and can be distributed to other people. So, for example, cocaine and heroin, these are examples of controlled substances because they're restricted by the federal government.
Right. And they're you said a Schedule 1, there's a specific, the schedules are basically, they delve out, when we're going to get into a little bit later, the different punishment level for you possessing a certain type of drug.
And Schedule 1 is the highest,
it is
correct?
The highest,
so there's like Schedule 1, 2, and 3 of
I think
these
there's
drugs?
4. I believe there's 4.
Okay. So the higher this, Schedule 1 is going to have the worst punishment for distributing or
ascending,
conspiracy.
basically.
To distribute. And level 4 is going to be the lowest punishment.
Right. So like cocaine being a Schedule 1 means it's going to be the most severely punished. Yeah.
And Adderall is also a Schedule 1. I think a lot of people don't realize that.
Yeah.
So guys, if you're in school, don't share your Adderall.
Well, and that's why I said it's a great example, because that's one of those that people don't think of, especially kids don't think of. And that's one of the things, we've mentioned briefly before of my work with the National Fraternity, and that's the Adderall not fad, but the kind of the craze and the wave that's been going on for, over a decade now in college campuses. These kids don't realize how much trouble they really could get in if they're caught.
Huge amounts of trouble.
And candidly, the DEA is not going to go after DEA, Drug Enforcement Agency, is not going to go after maybe Tommy and Katie selling one pill to one student. But
if Tommy and Kimmy turn this into a big profit, and they do it every time finals comes around, and Kimmy plans, she's like, I'm only going to keep half my bottle because that's all I need to cram for finals, and I can sell the rest at like, I don't know, $200 a pill. That's a lot of money.
And then all of a sudden you got Kimmy and Tommy, the drug kingpins at State University.
Yeah, at State University, and Kimmy's walking around in designer clothes just like Emma.
Exactly. And see, here we are, full circle. We're right back at it.
She followed him on Instagram and was badly influenced.
Bad idea. But there's a question I have posed on here, and there's a reason that most of the federal cases that have to do with drugs, you see them, at least nowadays, charged as conspiracies. And the reason they do that is because if you think about it, think about all the Narcos movies and everything that we see in the TV show series. It's hard to catch professional traffickers with drugs on their person.
Yeah, it's not like, if this is like a kilo of Coke, right? I'm taking my shoe and shoving it in my blazer. Right. You're not going to catch Emma holding a kilo of Coke in her nice fitted designer blazer, right? So it's not going to be like, oh, red-handed. It's going to be, oh, we caught you in a conspiracy to distribute. Right,
exactly. And then at that point, you get to ring in everybody that's part of the conspiracy, which means you get to ring in all the different quantities of dope that you seized, and you get to charge everybody for the entirety of that quantity of dope. And that makes sense. It can lead to some unfairness, and we're going to get into that, some of my personal views here in a second.
Yeah, and we'll bring in Kim Kardashian West, or maybe I should just call her Kardashian now.
It's probably not, the divorce didn't finalize yet,
No, she just filed.
Okay, so eventually it's going to probably get there. Yeah.
Chloe did lose Lamar's last name and went back to Kardashian, so I think that. We'll see. I don't know. Who knows? But
it makes it to where you can charge more people. The U.S. Attorney's Office and the federal government can charge more individuals. And in the big picture, that makes sense. You want to round up all the bad guys, right, and go after them that way. Now, it does add an interesting concept, and I put this specifically in here because it's thrown around a lot. You actually hear it in a lot of rap lyrics, but this concept called ghost dope.
I've never heard of this.
Okay.
How do you know a pop culture thing I don't know?
Well, it's more, it comes out of federal criminal defense.
That's why.
And so I've handled cases where we deal with this kind of stuff.
Have you handled a ghost dope case?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, most of the federal work I've done has been drug related.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I've got some. I'm going to tell one of the stories at the end to kind of personal anecdote, tell the story. But was there idea,
designer clothing?
It was not designer clothing.
Breaking my heart.
But the concept of ghost dope it comes from the idea that drug sentences and the severity of their punishment is calculated based on, one, the schedule of the drug, and then two, how much of it did you have?
Like literally the amount.
Literally the amount in dry weight. In
dry weight. So if we're talking about coke, it's like kilos or grams.
Right.
Heroin, probably grams, I'm guessing.
I believe so. And I just don't want to misquote this. So meth, we're usually talking about grams. We usually do it in kilos when it comes to heroin, pot, cocaine, and primarily because what you're dealing with is large quantities if they're being prosecuted and if you're looking at a conspiracy.
And I guess methamphetamines typically come in pill format, like speed.
Right? It can. It can come in different formats. Okay. I mean, varying degrees.
Okay, this is showing how little I actually know about drugs.
You can take the pills. It's also injectable, so there's different. There's
needles?
That's usually more on the heroin side. We don't have to get into all that.
I hate needles.
This is not from experience, everybody. Trust me. But the federal government, because it's based on how much you have, the quantity of what you have, they want to. Their job is to punish the most severe offenders in the most severe way they can. So they want to attribute as much of the dope that they can to the bad actor, to the person being accused of the crime.
Sure.
And so a lot of times the way this plays out is when you have undercover agents or confidential informants, which, a CI, confidential informant, that's someone usually who is part of the conspiracy, but maybe the feds get to them early and get them to cooperate so that they can get more information, build a case against the other people in the conspiracy.
So is this person like wearing a wire? Like what's going on?
They could, not necessarily.
Not always.
Not always, but if they are able to come and testify and say, yes, I was given, a kilo of cocaine, I went and sold it to this person, then that gives the DEA, the U.S. Attorney's Office, the ability to then prosecute that person who purchased the dope. So what can happen is, and typically the way this plays out, I want to read this word for word because it's important. The concept of ghost dope comes from that confidential informant can come in and testify that I sold them X amount of drugs over the course of X amount of time. And then without having to prove the state or the U.S. government, without having to prove that transaction actually occurred on May 12th, May 18th, June 22nd, they can say, well, you know what? He testified to this. So we can just calculate out that he said he did it 20 times and he sold 20 kilos each time. We don't have to prove each time that it happened. We just calculate that all out. And that's ghost dope that we get to attribute to the quantity we charge that defendant with. And so it's very backwards compared to what we normally see.
I was about to say this, what?
So it's been approved by case law. The Supreme Court has upheld it. It becomes the burden. It becomes more of an affirmative defense. The defendant has to disprove that statement and say, well, no, on this date, I didn't buy that much. I bought this much.
That's wild to me.
It's very wild. And there's obviously there is a lot of strong opinions from me and my corner about how unconstitutional I think that is.
I'd be very interested to have you and Terry Avance have a discussion about this. Terry Avance is my friend. That's
I was going to say, we got to get her on the show.
Yeah. Well, she just started at McLennan County DA's office very recently. So we'll have to get her on.
Yeah. No, I think it would be a great debate, on all, we'll pick out some issues about it, but
she's wicked smart, man. Not that you're not, but I mean,
well, no, absolutely,
like really smart,
absolutely. But that's the concept of ghost dope, and that becomes important when we talk about the sentencing guidelines because it bumps your level up. So we've mentioned the sentencing guidelines numerous times. Generally, Andrea, what are the sentencing guidelines? How do they come into play?
Yeah, so the sentencing guidelines are created by the legislature and then they're ratified, they're adopted, they're put into law, and the sentencing guidelines then are utilized by the courts when it comes to determining what your fine and or prison time is going to be for your punishment. So for example, if you have been convicted of conspiracy to distribute, X amount of cocaine, the court or the judge, after your guilty phase is done, guilt or innocence phase is done, you're found to be guilty. And now it's sentencing. It's kind of like almost like a second part of the trial.
Right.
It is a second part of the trial where the judge then determines, okay, so this is what you were convicted for, and maybe other factors are taken into account, but then they look at the sentencing guidelines, and it's basically like a book that they look, and they say, here is your crime, here is the amount of drugs that you were, convicted of having a conspiracy to distribute, and here's the range that I can sentence you for in prison, X to Y number of years, and maybe based on some other factors, I don't know, like behavior or priors. I'm going to give you the maximum sentencing guideline. Or, oh, you've been pretty good. I'm just going to give you the minimum. But can still be a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And to make sure, just to kind of summarize for our listeners, the way that a federal criminal trial or case really comes into being and ends, and we're not going to talk about each one of these specific steps, but you have an investigation where you've got some arm of the federal government, the Drug Enforcement Agency, the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, the FBI, Homeland Security. They're investigating criminal activity that's going on. Eventually, they build a case. They get an indictment issued by the court that says, look, by a grand jury that says, look, there's enough evidence here to say that this crime probably was committed by this person. And then an arrest warrant's issued, person's arrested. And then at that point, the case is opened up. There's plea negotiations that go on. And then either the defendant eventually, most of the time, either pleads guilty or goes to trial, like you said, and then is either convicted or found not guilty. If they are convicted or they plead guilty, then we go to that second phase you were talking about, and that's the sentencing hearing. And we've mentioned this before on the show, but in the federal system in our country, juries don't sentence people. It's just the judge. In 1987, Congress decided, okay, we've got federal law that governs this entire country, and we've got different sentences for the same types of crime coming out of Texas and Pennsylvania and Ohio, Vermont, California. And on our other episodes, we've talked about how different states, actually in last week's episode, we talked about how different states have different policies. And so that's why they can enact different laws. Well, the federal government said, these are federal laws that apply countrywide. We really need to be uniform in how we're punishing them. And so they came up with these sentencing guidelines in 1987, and they get amended like you were talking about and put into place. And really, we're going to have Matt put a picture up of the chart for our listeners and viewers to see. But really, you've just got this chart. It's got a y-axis that goes vertical. It's got a base level numbers on it. And then you've got an x-axis that is on the top that has what's called criminal history points on it.
Okay.
And so the idea is that as you move from the top left to the bottom right of the chart, you're moving to more severe punishment.
So let's give an example. Let's go back to Tommy and Kimmy. So say Kimmy has been a straight A student and she just was influenced by Tommy because they're dating and she's in love and, oh, he's a bad boy and she likes that, whatever. Yeah. Kimmy, my heart goes out to you, honey. Anyway, so
she's going through that rock star phase. She wants to date the bad boy.
Yeah, and then dress like Emma.
Exactly.
So anyway, Kimmy, right, it's her pills that she and Tommy are putting into these baggies for the Addy, into the baggies to distribute to the frat bros in the park. But Kimmy has been basically an angel all her life until now. Tommy has been a bad boy. He has been, convicted before of getting into fights, so battery, right?
Sure.
So he's been convicted of battery, and say maybe he has been convicted of possession of marijuana. So he's got priors. If these two actually catch the DA's attention, and they actually go to trial and they're convicted for distribution or conspiracy to distribute Adderall, and they're at sentencing, how are Kimmy and Tommy's sentencing going to be different?
So, and let me change one thing in the hypothetical. Okay. Let's say that they plead guilty.
Okay, they plead guilty.
And the reason I say that is because it allows us to kind of go a different range here to talk about some of these different things. So, I'll talk about a few concepts and then we'll apply them.
Okay.
And so, on the x-axis here, what basically happens, and unfortunately, because the sentencing guidelines are so complicated, the book, the chart's very simple. The book behind them is pretty thick.
So for those who are listening just to the audio portion, that looks like 1.5 inches, 2 inches.
Probably, yeah. Of really thin paper that go through all the different things that you have to apply when you're trying to figure out where on this chart do we fall. So on the left, on the x-axis, the y-axis, these different base levels start from 1. I believe they go to 36, if I remember correctly.
Are you pulling up the chart?
Actually, I'm pulling up the chart right now.
Oh my gosh.
No, 43. I'm sorry. So, and I'll just take a look at it. They go from 1 to 43 on this chart, and this is a base level of where you start. So what basically happens is they say, okay, Kimmy and Tommy, this is a conspiracy to traffic a controlled substance. It's a Schedule I controlled substance. And so it falls somewhere here. You start somewhere between 1 and 43.
The offense level.
The offense level. And so the higher the number, the more severe your sentence is. So let's say that they start at let's just go with a 7. Let's just say it starts at offense level 7. Well, now we got to look on the top at the x-axis. What is their criminal history points?
Criminal history points.
It's not as black and white as you would think, but prior convictions are factored in some point scoring way. And that thick book is what kind of delineates how those points are awarded out. And as you move from left to right, the sentences again increase. And this is, by the way, the middle of this table, when you look at it on YouTube, this is in months, is the way this is delved out. Yeah. So like 360, we're dealing with
360 months.
Right.
It's a really long time.
Yes. Yeah. So that's how that's laid out there. So the more criminal history you have, the more severe your punishment will be. The more severe your crime is, the more severe your punishment will be. Once you get in there, once you start with that base level, there are a number of factors that can enhance and make you move further down the line, having a higher sentence. And then there's a number of factors the court looks at that can move you back up the line on the sentence.
Okay.
And so the different factors, and I'm summarizing these significantly.
Okay.
But the categories are circumstances of the case at hand. Was there a deadly weapon used? Was there violence that occurred? Did you hurt somebody when you committed this offense? Was there a crime against that you committed violence, and then also it was against a police officer? That's gonna move you further down. So you start at 7. Maybe let's say Tommy had a gun. Okay, boom, you're going down 2 more levels to level 9, which is going to increase your sentence by maybe another 10 months or 24 months or whatever.
Shoot, Tommy, not looking good.
Right. So those types of things that can enhance it. The acceptance of responsibility, and so it's a weird kind of almost Boy Scout kind of thought of like, okay, well, he accepted responsibility, so that's great. This is the reason I said let's use a plea deal, because
I see, because it'll lessen the punishment.
That can move you up the ladder to where it's like go from a 7 to maybe a 6 if you admit, okay, you know what I did was wrong, and you accept the responsibility. And again, I'm summarizing. There's more to it than that, because the idea too is that if you accept the responsibility, they want to get a sworn statement from you that explains everything that happened. They being the federal government.
I was about to ask, what's the motivation for getting them to just accept?
The motivation from the government side, because then they can maybe get more information about other stuff that's going on that can lead to other arrests for other investigations.
Okay,
so that's the idea. Now, in previous criminal history, we just talked about that. You're going to move to the right, and then the 5K1, what some people call the Snitch Provision.
Snitch Provision.
5K1 is a section in the sentencing guidelines that says if you provide information that leads to another arrest or to helps an investigation that occurs that's ongoing, then you get a big bump in the positive direction for you. You get a lot can be knocked off your sentence for providing that information and then being willing to testify. That helps more too, about something that will lead to another arrest that has nothing to do with, not necessarily has anything to do with your arrest. So we call it the snitch provision because you're snitching on someone in order to lessen your sentence. Now, and that becomes, you can understand why the government would want that, because then it leads to more arrests.
Yeah,
and can help out. The interesting thing about that is, just to caveat on it for a second, if someone provides information that could be a 5K1 reduction, but the government already had that information, you don't necessarily get that 5K1 reduction anymore.
So you could snitch, but you better hope that no one else has snitched about the same information before you, because now you're putting yourself out there. You're betraying your friend, or, well, I don't know how much of a friend they are.
Your co-conspirator.
You're a co-conspirator, but it's not going to do you any favors with the government.
Right.
Oh, that stinks. It's not like the government's going to be like, we already know this, so start
And that's
over.
the thing. And that's the thing is they don't tell you before. You have to offer the information, then the government gets to say, okay, well, here are my cards. I already knew this, so.
Bummer.
Yeah. So
Bummer,
leverage is all on the government side in that situation.
Wow.
And so going back to Tommy and Kimmy, if Kimmy is willing to testify against Tommy, she could probably get a 5K1 reduction that she'd be eligible for it. We'll put it that way, and try to get some of the time knocked off. And if she's got a clean criminal history, then she's probably, that's going to help. Now, in your scenario we talked about too, Tommy actually had the Adderall on his person, and so that's going to add enhancement to his classification too, because he just didn't conspire. He actually was the guy carrying the Adderall.
And he was carrying a gun.
And he was carrying the gun. So that adds the enhancement too. And there's other enhancements that go into this too, like, and I'm forgetting the exact name of it, but if you are an organizer or a major player, especially in like a cartel situation.
I was about to say, does this go to the RICO statutes?
It can, yes. RICO gets classified in this too. But if you're like, there's a difference between being a drug mule and then being the one that's making the most money off of it. There's an enhancement that goes with that. Basically being the boss, like you said. So that plays into it as well. And so what happens is you've got all these factors we just talked about that can increase, decrease, move to the left, right, all that stuff. That's the reason there's a huge sentencing hearing where the defense lawyer comes in and the defense lawyer will argue, because this isn't black and white. It sounds like it should be because we're on a chart, but it's not. Because the judge has the ultimate discretion to say, all right, well, I think this factor, I think they did accept responsibility. I think they didn't. I think they did provide information that would be classified as 5K1, or I don't think they did. The judge gets to make that call. And so the state, what happens is you go in, and we'll just take the 5K1 idea. State says, well, we already had this information that Kimmy provided. And then the defense attorney said, well, you had a piece of the information, but then she provided some color commentary that led to you to find one other Adderall trafficker on State University's campus.
Yeah, say that she suggested that, well, I know Tommy meets with this guy, Billy, a lot, and I see them exchanging baggies. And it looks like there's pills in it, but I don't know what the pills are. But I see them exchanging baggies, and Billy looks like this, and he lives here, and they have met on Wednesday every week for the last 6 months.
Yeah. And say that the DEA agent says, well, or the U.S. attorney says, well, we already knew that was going on. We hadn't had actual eyes laid on the transaction before. Defense attorney's and we're oversimplifying this, but the defense attorney's going to say, well, okay, yeah, you didn't have a witness before this. She's providing you witness testimony that's going to help lead to this arrest. She should get a 5K1 credit on this sentence. And so, judge, we're asking you to bump this up. And so that's the types of arguments that happen in that context.
I see.
And so the judge ultimately, like you were saying earlier, says, okay, I find that she did accept responsibility. She did provide information that should lead to a 5K1. She didn't possess, she was not an organizer, so she's not going to get that enhancement, all that kind of stuff. And the judge sentences her to somewhere on the sentencing guidelines and in a term of months. And that's how that plays out. Now, the other things that go into this, we talked about ghost dope earlier.
Yeah.
That's considered relevant conduct. So you didn't actually have the dope on you. We didn't actually witness you trafficking it, whatever. That gets factored into, okay, can the judge increase the sentence or should the judge decrease the sentence based on ghost dope testimony?
That still seems wild.
It's crazy. It's a crazy concept, and defense lawyers have been waving the banner for how wrong this is for a long time.
Yeah.
No one's listening. So, it's hard to feel sorry for major cartel drug traffickers.
Look, I don't feel sorry for El Chapo if he's getting, if ghost dope helped put him away, I don't feel sorry for him at all. But, is ghost dope used when, for example, you have someone who is being convicted of, like, pot distribution, like conspiracy to distribute pot, and a first time of...
Well, I'm sorry, I interrupted you, but anybody that's charged with these federal crimes, that can come into play. And so that's why you hear these stories about, you mentioned Kim Kardashian earlier, who's taken up a banner of really trying to free these nonviolent offenders that are serving life or long, extremely long sentences. That kind of stuff can happen. If the DEA is trying to round up a bunch of people, but they can't get some of the bigger players because they just can't connect it, sometimes they drop the hammer on some of the lower players that they found, and that relevant conduct, that ghost dope, gets wrapped in there. And all of a sudden you've got a low-level mule who wasn't making a lot of money off of this, wasn't getting rich off of trafficking cocaine, but they've got a bunch of transactions that he was involved with, and he's the one left holding the bag.
Yeah, see, like that seems rough for me, because I remember on one of the episodes of Keeping Up with the Kardashians, not her initials, of Keeping Up with the Kardashians, she had this meeting with the president, and she had several women that had received pardons because they were first-time nonviolent offenders for drug convictions.
Yeah.
And I'm listening to this, and it was like conspiracy to distribute marijuana. Okay. Look, however you feel about pot, it's not heroin. Heroin is just not good. Like, there is nothing good about heroin, right? At least from what I can tell in like movies and TV and stuff. But pot, I'm like, look, it's illegal in California, in Colorado. I know it's not legal at the federal level, but like, I don't think someone should be sentenced so severely for conspiracy to distribute marijuana, especially if it's a ghost dope situation, right? They shouldn't be treated like they were, distributing heroin. That just doesn't seem fair to me. You know my opinion on it. I absolutely agree with you on that. And I also have a major issue with nonviolent offenders serving,
ridiculous sentences.
Especially a first-time nonviolent offender.
I agree. And the argument on the other side, which I understand, is that trafficking creates violence and creates death and destruction, all the types of things that happen because of all the things that go on with a trafficking situation. I understand that argument, but in the scenario we're talking about, and I don't know the facts of those specific people who were pardoned, but generally from what you're saying and from what we're talking about here, first-time offenders, person left holding the bag, you couldn't get to the big guy. That doesn't sound like justice to me. It doesn't sound like what the system was set up to promulgate and to achieve.
It almost sounds like to me that the AUSA the AUSA was like, well, shoot, I couldn't get to El Jefe, so I don't want to look so bad, and I don't want to have completely wasted the FBI's resources, so I'll just drop the hammer on Lucy, the low-level soldier who is a first-time nonviolent drug offender, and the drug here is pot. Yeah.
And those sad situations happen,
And that kind of breaks my heart. Like, if if you're trafficking heroin, drop the hammer.
Yeah.
Coke, drop the hammer. Pot, like, first time, nonviolent. I was like, no, I feel like a little bit more grace could be given.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm going to end this with some positive things, at least from, my left-wing defense mindset.
Your left-wing defense mindset.
My left-wing defense mindset. In 2005, the Supreme Court, we used to have mandatory minimum sentences that were put into place where it says, if you were caught with this type of drug, with this quantity, the judge cannot sentence you below that. So the judge can't look at acceptance of responsibility, the judge has to start here, and he or she can go up, but they can't go below that.
That's a little rough.
Supreme Court in 2005 said that was unconstitutional because at that point you are you're not allowing what the purpose of the sentencing guidelines were put into play. You're not allowing the judge to make a call on these different factors, and you're basically it is a due process problem that you're saying, okay, they're not even allowed to have a process to argue. It's just boom, you're right there. Yeah. So that was one swing that went the right way, that in my opinion went the right way, and said, okay, it's not all of a sudden, all right, you have coke, boom, mandatory 36-month sentence. There's leeway that the judge can deal with all the factors we talked about. And then there's what I call, this is my own term, this is not a legal term, but it's kind of the ultimate Hail Mary that a defense lawyer will always try to argue. Is this a football term? It's definitely a football term. Okay. I mean, we got the ball right here, right? So
yeah, you have the ball and the shoes. Don't forget the shoes.
Right. So there are special circumstances outside of those factors we talked about, acceptance of responsibility, all that kind of stuff, that the judge, and it's very nebulous, very abstract, the judge can look at specific things that can persuade him or her to sentence outside the bounds of the guidelines, or to engage in what's called a downward departure in the sentence. Okay. And so this is the story I said I was going to end with.
I was about to say, I want story time before we leave.
And this is a success story in my opinion. I had a case, and I got to keep it generic, but
of course,
had a case 4 or 5 years ago that me and a guy out of San Antonio were working together. We were representing a low-level drug mule. And it was a methamphetamine conspiracy case, 19 defendants, 400 kilos of meth, mainly based out of 400 kilos.
That's like a lot.
It was. And it had ties into the cartel in Mexico. It went into Central Texas and here in North Texas. And so it was here in the northern districts where the case was. My co-counsel and I, after working with this kid, I say kid, he was 22 at the time.
So a kid.
He was a kid. And working with this guy, he had some severe issues growing up. He was prescribed ADHD medication. And, for those that don't know, there's amphetamine that's involved in that. That's why sometimes people can test positive when they take a drug test if they have an AD medication prescription.
Oh, interesting.
That's why, here's a little fact for everybody. Keep your prescriptions on you. If you ever have to do a drug test, you need to be able to provide those and show, okay, look, if it shows up, I'm legally prescribed this.
Well, and also too, I know a lot of kids are like, hey, I want to be organized, so I'm going to put my Adderall or my Vyvanse medication in my little plastic pill holder, and it says, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, whatever. And so I'm going to put the Adderall in there along with my B6 vitamin and my multivitamin. Should they be doing that because they're taking it out of their prescription bottle?
Keep the prescription somewhere where you can show it to an officer if he pulls you over. Because that's the problem, is that you get pulled over and you've got it in your console and they, some reason, search your car, you can set whatever, they find it. Well, they've got to send that off to the lab to test it. You're probably going to get cuffed until they get those lab results back. And then it may be fine, but you had to bail out of jail. You had to pay a lawyer.
That sounds awful.
It's terrible. Keep your prescription on you. So that's what I would say. So with this specific client, he had at a certain point at 18, you no longer have insurance. He can't get that medication because he doesn't have insurance. He's not on his parents' insurance. And again, I'm shortening the facts here. And methamphetamine has been a way that some people self-medicate for those types of drugs, and you can no longer get them. That on top of a lot of other life experiences that I won't go into great detail because I think it'll divulge too much information. He'd been through a lot of tragedy and a lot of other things that factored into kind of what led him to the place that he was at. Credit to our judge. We brought in a psychologist and a medical doctor to come in and examine our client and really talk through and put a report together that summarized, look, these are real issues. This is a real thing. It's a real problem. And he is the prime candidate of someone who is suffering from this issue that we're seeing in our society where people are overly medicated as they're growing up, kids. And then there's not a way to wean them off, so not the right term, but there's not a transition period. How do we transition this? Okay, they've been prescribed these medications. They no longer can afford this on their insurance anymore. And we're not going to get into, Affordable Care Act, all that stuff, but that's a problem, The judge listened to our argument, listened to the reports, and she did engage in a downward departure. And he was looking at 11 years, got him down to 7.
Wow.
And he's actually about to get out now. And so it's a good thing. And he'd actually, there's a lot of great things that have happened with him while he's been incarcerated. He's probably one of the more successful stories about getting the rehabilitation he needed. And it really helped. He had a supportive family, all that kind of stuff. But that's an example of, okay, look, we've got these guidelines and everything. The Supreme Court has said you have to at least give the judge the opportunity to consider these outside variables and potentially downward depart from the sentence and potentially help, not help, but take that into consideration when you're sentencing this and not make it as black and white as it could be. So I obviously enjoy talking about this stuff. So I'm glad you let me run through this chart and talk about all these things. But I do think it's important, and we kept this very high level. But it's very important for people to understand how this works. So when they're hearing things in the news about some of the things that Kim Kardashian has done, which in my opinion are great. I'm not like a huge fan. I don't watch all of her stuff, but I love the work that she has done and the attention she's drawn to what I think is a major problem.
I definitely think that Kim Kardashian has chosen a great subject to use her celebrity to bring national attention to. Because I definitely think that this is a big issue, and we can talk about drug courts another time because I think that's also an area that is a great way of dealing with nonviolent drug offenses and giving people a real solution to what I think oftentimes is the underlying problem, which is they need help. They need help. Maybe they have a medical issue, they have a mental issue. These are all legitimate medical concerns, and they need help. They don't need to be punished. They need help and rehabilitation.
No, I agree. And I won't go on a long soapbox, but I'll end with this, that I agreed with everything you just said. And I am a major proponent of prison and plea bargain reform. I think we have a lot of problems in our system because of what happens with nonviolent offenders, especially first-time offenders, and the fact that we're not getting them the help that they need so that they can be rehabilitated, become fully functioning, contributing members to our society. The problem that, this is just the truth. It's not a popular opinion that what I'm about to say, but it's not sexy to run politically as a congressman or woman on the platform of, I want to help first-time drug offenders. I want to reform how this is done. People that tend to listen to those things and tend to vote on those, they most of the time hadn't been affected by this. They haven't had a family member that's gone through what some of these scenarios we're talking about. So they don't know what that feels like. They don't see the injustices. And that fires me up because maybe the more privileged parts of society don't see that, doesn't mean it's not an issue we need to correct because it benefits everybody.
Yeah, I wish that there were more people like Kim Kardashian who do use their celebrity to bring these issues to light, because frankly, I'm a lawyer and I didn't really know a lot about that. My criminal involvement, I had one criminal case and it was healthcare fraud. It was not drug related.
There's no ghost up there.
There was no ghost up there. It was my hearing aids. So, for me, it's been a revelation in seeing how she's trying to help these women who I think have been dealt unjust sentences, in my personal opinion. And I think it really humanizes them. It's so easy to have an us versus them mentality. Like, oh, those terrible druggies. Well, are they really? Listen, they're people too. I'm not advocating mercy for El Chapo. He's a horrible person. But
Agreed.
But, Kimmy, our little Kimmy. Honey, you just made a lot of bad decisions because you fell in love with the wrong bad boy.
And she needs to learn from that.
And she needs to learn. She does.
But let's do it the right way.
Let's give her the help she needs. So,
well, thank you, and thank our listeners for letting me get all fired up and do my thing here today, because I do love talking about these things. And I'm glad that we were able to talk about it and wrap in, designer clothes and Kim Kardashian, all this kind of stuff as well.
I love talking about the Kardashians.
Well, absolutely. Guys, stay tuned for Closing Arguments. We've got another update on another Black Lives Matter, another man who was shot and killed in New York, and just another string in the long line of those. And stay tuned for listening for Closing Arguments, and we'll see you again next time.
Hey y'all, don't go. We have Closing Arguments coming up for you in just a second. But before you listen, make sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast if you got any value from today's episode. And please share the podcast with others. And if you want to interact with Austin or me, or tell us what you want to hear next, you can find me on Instagram at andrea.s.turner, Austin at The Dallas Lawyer, spelled out, or the podcast, #lawyered, spelled out. Look forward to hearing from you.
This month, a grand jury in New York decided not to indict police who killed Daniel Prude, a black man who died of asphyxiation while in police custody. Daniel Prude was killed in March of 2020 while being restrained by police through use of a spit hood placed on Prude's head after he informed police he had contracted the coronavirus. Prude was visiting his brother in New York, allegedly was under the influence of an illegal drug, and then left his brother's house in the middle of the night, prompting his brother to call police out of concern for his safety. This has caused another uproar in the long line of these similar situations that have happened across our country, and we urge you to continue to monitor this in the context of the overall conversation of this matter.